Hey guys, tonight we step into the bright hush of the open desert, where noon is a stern teacher and shade is an art. Welcome to Desert Shade, Bedouin Ways to survive noon heat. Settle in. Breathe slow, and let the dunes roll by at a gentle pace while we learn how people made midday not an enemy, but a courteous neighbor that asks for patience. Even with good manners and better shade, noon sometimes tests the weave. A peg sulks free, a waterskin weeps along a seam, a sandal strap argues with skin, a reed wing flips an opinion, a head that was listening to patience begins to listen to pride. These are not dramas if they're answered in the language noon understands: small, shaded, reversible. The rule underneath all the rules: make the world smaller first. Before any repair, pull a knee-high lake of shade over the work, reed wing up, cloak low from saddle to staff, camel angled to lend its flank. Work where calves are cool and wrists can find the jar's exhale. Heat is an impatient supervisor. Dismiss it politely and everything behaves. Leaking skins are mended with calm, not thirst. First, invert the skin and let a thread of water find its own way toward the weep. Noon light shows the shine. Shade the spot with your hand and mark it with a thorn scratch. Empty just enough to take the strain off. Then pinch a smear of softened pitch or fat into the seam from the outside. If you have needle and gut, stitch short and shallow, following the old hole so the skin remembers. Swaddle damp and hang back in draft, not sun, so the mend seats as it cools. Drink from the jar while the skin learns its new manners. Sandals fail by inches. When a strap loosens pride into blisters, make a coupler from a twist of cloth under the leather so friction learns courtesy. If a thong snaps, a thin strip shaved from a spare palm ring or the sacrificial edge of a reed mat becomes a fine, forgiving tie. Dust soles with clean sand before you stand. Sweatshine is treachery at noon. Walk a dozen short steps inside ankle shade before you trust the fixed distance. Reed wings forget wind once an hour. When a gust flips the mat, don't chase it into sun. Lay the mat on its face inside shade and retire the two leeward corners with shorter toggles. Add a small brush of thorn along the windward edge so the wing grows honest weight. If cords have learned bad habits, plait new ties from palm fiber. Over 2, under 1, count it aloud in slow breaths. The count returns pulse and keeps hands from hurrying. Hair cloth that tears is mended with a herringbone that behaves like humility. Bring the two lips together under the skirt, set your stitches a thumb apart, and leave a little looseness so the panel can continue to breathe. Noon prefers seams with modesty. Tight stitching turns shade into sulk. If a dead man peg walks in sand, bury it crosswise, not deeper. Sand obeys geometry more than strength. The jar's coolth sometimes goes missing when cloth forgets its job. Re-wet the sleeve along the shoulder, not the belly. Wind needs that curve to do its work. Turn the damp face upwind. Paint a finger of water along the coping stone where the jar will rest so the stone remembers how to be kind. If the jar has learned too much sun, brush the ground beneath it to mat and lift it onto a palm ring. Cool comes back through patience, not shock. Hearts wander in heat. When speech grows sharp or steps lengthen against sense, trade the person a task that shrinks the world. Count 7 ripple lines. Turn jar cloth when the crackle dies. Carry the reed and watch for a better draft. Work with rules is medicine. Argument under high sun is debt. A pinch of salt on the tongue, 3 nose breaths, a 60 heartbeats sit with calves in shade. Most tempers return like sensible animals. Animals make noon mistakes that are really truths. A camel balks at a glittering flat. The stick says the crust sighs when tested, so you skirt. A goat worries a shadow that looks like a hole. You tap the spot and let sound settle it. If a beast frets at a flipping wing, lower the shade and angle your shoulder to block the first gust. Once the wing has a language, nerves learn it. Dust wind, charmal with teeth, deserves a smaller caravan. Bring cloth low, tuck voices inside. Set the reed wing into a half moon so it breaks the grit and bleeds wind. Eyes drop to 2 paces. The staff learns the ground before feet do. Men's wait unless they are ankle important. The desert does not grade your speed. Only your corrections. Heat-stiff bodies are mended without theatre. Shade first, then wrists and nape to jar's breeze. then pale tea in 3 swallows, then the smallest food, date, sip, quiet. Loosen belts a hole, lift headcloth a fold at the crown, damp a cloth and lay it along the pulse points where blood will carry sense backward to the head. Rest in posture that looks like work, a strap trimmed, a toggle respliced. Pride sleeps harder if you put it to a useful task. Wrong turns at noon are the generous mishap, cheap to correct if you pay with courtesy. Backtrack inside the same shade choreography. Front steps become rear steps, read turns, camel flanks trade places, so no one spends fresh heat to rewrite an old sentence. Mark the good line for the next party with a turtle stone tipped for a wrist, not a banner. Dawn will erase it without litter. By the time you've mended 3 small things, strap, seam, temper, the hour has softened a shade. The reed wing breathes again, the jar sings its low crackle, sandals whisper instead of slap, the caravan's pulse returns to 3s and 60s. Noon didn't change. You did, by making room for fixes that were already inside your kit and your manners. At noon, the desert does not roar, it hums. Heat rises in thin, glassy veils, the horizon trembles, and everything that survives does so by making small, clever bargains with the sun. The Bedouin tradition turns those bargains into habits, the kind that seem unremarkable until you notice how kind they are to bodies, beasts, and breath. Shade begins with black cloth, not white. Goat hair tents, woven tight enough to temper wind and loose enough to breathe. Drink sunlight rather than reflecting it in angry flashes. Under that dark canopy, air moves because hot rises through the hair's tiny gaps, pulling a draft from the tent's low edge. A noon house is not a wall. It is a slow breeze machine, tuned by the way the mat edges lift and the cords lean. Women glance at the cloth and know if a panel wants slack or pull. Men feel the rope's tone and set a peg a half-hand deeper. A boy learns which corner to loosen when the wind veers. Shade here is managed like water, measured, guided, never trapped out in the open. Travelers draw shade from small anchors, a camel's flank, a narrow screen of reed lashed to 2 poles, a cloak stretched low between saddles. The trick is height. Shade held too high surrenders to glare. Shade held knee-high becomes a cool lake for ankles and calves, where blood returns from the feet a little less warmed. A rope between sticks throws a line that moves with the sun, and people move with it without fuss, shifting cups, dates, a water skin, a thread bag of tea. You can cross a desert by noon not by marching, but by letting your camp creep a few handspans at a time. Clothing is a private tent. Loose sleeves make shadows. Folds slow air. Colors speak softly. Under a white outer robe, a darker inner layer soaks light and spares skin the sting of reflection. A headcloth is not just a badge of place. It is an instrument, folded to pad the crown from heat, draped to shade the neck, looped to keep sand from the mouth when noon winds play. Sandals are honest, leather that yields to swelling, straps that do not bite, soles that whisper instead of slap. If feet stay calm, the rest follows. Water shows its best manners when it is not asked to be cold. Clay jars exhale. A damp skin hung in moving air sighs. Water cooled by evaporation drinks easy, not shocking. Thirst is paced, not defied. A mouthful swished, a sip swallowed, a pause, then another. Salt moves in pockets like a small prayer, taken in a pinch so legs keep listening to the ground. Tea at noon is not folly. It is diplomacy. A warm sip persuades the body that the world outside and the world inside agree on temperature. Agreement saves sweat. Animals have their noon rules. Camels are walking shade posts, patient, deliberate, and sensible about the angle of light. They kneel with legs tucked under, narrowing their sun-touched surface. You sit where their soft shadow pulls, running a hand across the grain of hair that always seems to point toward patience. Hobbles are loose at noon. There is nowhere sensible to rush. Goats nap in the skinny shade of thorn, always nose to wind, reading small shifts you'd miss. A good header watches the goats. They will show when to move the reed screen and when to leave it. Food shrinks its ambitions at midday. Bread is thin and quick. Dates are slow and friendly. A little soft cheese licks salt back into the blood. A handful is a meal if eaten with shadows, breath, and unhurried talk. Fire goes small or sleeps altogether. The sun has taken the morning's chores into its kilns, and noon cooking is a fool's project. Better to let the day's blaze work on wet cloth and clay, to cool water, to dry rope, to set the tent into an easy draft. Walking at noon is a study in angles. The bright ground blinds if you insist on staring. So eyelids lower, gaze falls 2 paces ahead. The land is felt more than seen. The line, if there is a line, becomes a cluster, close enough to share a reed screen's tether, far enough that each person carries their own little weather. Step where crust stays firm, where grain is large and lazy, darker sand near a low brush, the wind's ripple telling you which way to slide. If sand scalds, you test with a stick, not a foot. If the stick protests, you wait in shade and turn waiting into a task. Trim a strap, mend a stitch, rewrap a headcloth. Busy hands ease the heat's pride. Noon teaches patience without lecture. Tasks shrink to the size of hands. Voices go soft. Stories shorten to the length of a shadow. A tether is reknotted. A girth strap is checked. A child is taught how to pour water so it lands on the jar's skin, not just into the mouth of the vessel, cooling the water by mercy, not by force. A woman turns a cloth so its damp side meets the breeze. A man lifts the tent edge a finger and feels the draft answer with thanks. Survival here is not a duel. It is a slow conversation with the sun, conducted in shade that moves, and when the sun inclines, everything lengthens. Shadows, tasks, sentences. The reed screen goes to the pack. The black haircloth breathes easier. The tea tastes a little like evening. You stand, a little salt on your tongue, a little cool in your calves, and find that noon passed without drama because the shade was managed like a friend you trust to tell you when to rest and when to rise. A tent in the open desert is not a wall told to stand. It is a conversation between cloth, wind, and patience. At noon, the best house is made from materials that already understand sun, goat hair that has learned to drink light, palm fiber that grips sand without argument, ropes that hum rather than snap. The Bedouin tent, the Bait al-Shah, the house of hair, is less a single object than a kit of manners. Panels you can add or remove. Skirts you can lift or let down. Cords you can slacken to make a breeze or tighten to hush a gust. It is a moving architecture for a moving hour. Haircloth is a kindly paradox. Woven from dark goat hair, it looks dense to the hand and behaves porous to the wind. The fibers swell a little if a rare shower brushes them, tightening the weave and shedding drops. They ease again when the heat returns, letting the tent breathe. Noonlight arrives like a stern visitor, and the black cloth receives it without glare, turning harshness into a gentler warmth. Inside, the air climbs through tiny galleries between threads, drawing a shy draft from the low edges where the cloth is pegged. Shade here is not a static pool. It is a slow river that moves from floor to eave. Panels are the grammar of the house. Each strip of haircloth, striped by custom, not fashion, is a sentence you can shorten or lengthen with toggles and braided cords. Morning uses one syntax, evening another, and noon has its own. The windward skirt is pegged close so blown sand cannot gossip under the edge. The leeward skirt is lifted a handspan on short props so hot air can leave politely. In a high noon with little wind, both long sides ride low, and only the end panels open as doors that talk to each other across a quiet floor. In a noon with a visiting breeze, the windward side lowers further, the leeward rises, and the tent becomes a lung. Rope is the tent's memory. The best lines are twisted from goat hair or palm fiber and finished with a hand that knows how to make strength behave. A rope left naked on sand will creep. A rope that passes over a simple wooden slider, just a board block or a forked stick, becomes adjustable without tantrum. Pegs are not merely hammered. In sand, they are buried like letters to be read by wind, a short trench cut with a stick. The peg laid crosswise as a dead man, sand replaced and pressed by foot. The line let out at an angle that makes the peg want to stay rather than to argue. Noon's gusts respect this kind of quiet engineering. The tent's posts, center and ridge, are not poles of pride but spines that understand sway. A good post sits in a shallow socket scooped in firm ground. Around it the sand is tamped with a water-sprinkled hand so it holds a polite cup. The ridge lifts just enough to make sitting a courtesy rather than a stoop. Too high, and heat loafs overhead like a lazy guest. Too low, and breath feels crowded. Noon asks for a ridge you can look under from outside and see a soft river of air bending through. Light turned to shade, shade turned to mercy beyond the basic house. There is the art of annexes, the wings and tongues of shade that make noon livable. A reed mat, rolled at dawn and unfurled by the 6th hour, is lashed to 2 sticks and set low on the sunward side, its shadow thrown like a shallow lake for ankles and water jars. Between camels, a cloth tongue is stretched just high enough to shelter heads and hands, not so high that glare reclaims the ground. Shade that stays knee-high cools blood returning from feet, and the body thanks you by slowing its complaints. The camp creeps with the sun, a peg moved, a mat shifted, a water skin rehung. A story paused and resumed 2 handspans to the left. Inside, noon changes the furniture. Piles of woven cushions flatten into low islands under the ridge so bodies can lie long and breathe easy. The hearth sleeps. Smoke under a noon canopy is a thief of comfort and respect for neighbours. Instead, the clay jar is made to work. A wet cloth mantles its shoulder so the jar exhales, cooling its own water by patience. Cups grow small and frequent. Tea is brewed light, not to conquer heat but to make peace with it. Dates are counted out like beads, each a unit of sugar and shade together, while a crumb of salty cheese returns sense to muscles. Clothing completes the house. A headcloth folded with an extra layer at the crown turns noon's hammer into a tap. Its tails shade neck and ears without closing the world. A light outer robe speaks softly to the sun. A darker underlayer absorbs stray brightness without flinging it back into eyes. Belts and girths slacken a hole at noon. Leather swells, bodies swell, and gear that refuses to swell becomes a grievance. Sandals find the tuning between too tight, feet argue, and too loose, sand complains. A quiet loop of cloth around the ankle under the strap prevents rub and raises the moral of the whole person. Camp order is noon safety. Children learn the noon rules with games that are really chores, shaking sandals before wearing them, turning the rolled edge of a mat up to check beneath, laying a short brush of thorn along the skirt where wind sneaks to persuade it to behave. Scorpion courtesy is practiced without drama. A pot left upside down is lifted with a stick and tipped away from the body. Stones are moved toward the lifter, not dragged. Hands bend noon on cool, high surfaces, not in hidden crevices. Sand-buried rope lines are walked with toes first, then heels, so no one trips the tent's quiet geometry. Animals are part of the architecture. Camels kneel in staggered positions so each throws shade where a hand can reach a waterskin without crossing a hot patch. Their hobbles are slack at noon. A beast that rests is a partner, not a tool. Goats find the thread of breeze at the skirt's lowest gap and sleep with noses pointed there. A good header notes the angle and matches the next peg to it. A patient dog patrols the reed screen, not to guard from enemies, but to keep the small shade honest. Sometimes a tail makes more draft than any flap. Sight is half the house. A camp that sits on a pale shoulder of ground, not in a hollow where heat collects, breathes twice as kindly. A tiny rise leads wind in. A faint slope drains spills and saves the shaded soil from becoming humid. The tent faces not at the sun but toward the day's best breeze. Front and back are duties, not directions. A thorn bush at the right distance becomes a second wall without asking. Palm fronds stacked and lashed become a noon fence that bleeds wind rather than blocks it. A kindness to cloth and nerves alike. Maintenance is a noon craft. Cords are warmed between fingers to find when knots have bitten and need dressing. Toggles are felt for grit that will cut them later. Horn needle and palm thread appear, not as chores but as excuses to rest under shade while mending makes minutes gentle. Hair cloth is whisked with a soft brush to raise a fluff that improves its breath, and skirts are straightened. Not to impress the horizon, no one is watching, but to keep the house's manners in good repair for the long afternoon. Travellers between camps carry their shade in pieces. A rolled mat and 2 short poles make an instant noon on a bare dune crest. A cloak spread low from saddle to stick becomes a librarian's hush over a page of sand on which tea and dates read better. A water jar rides inside a wet bag, dark cloth outward, so a moving breeze writes cool on the skin. The line walks in a quiet cluster, each person a moving wall and an alley for the next. The tallest and the reed screen take the worst of the sun. The child or the elder strolls in the middle lane. Where noon becomes an idea rather than an argument, mirage is a noon rumor and is treated as such, observed, not obeyed. The horizon offers lakes that flee. The ground offers truths underfoot. Feet and sticks red crust from sifted sand, firm grain from treacherous glare. Route is chosen by feel as much as sight. Darker swales that hold coarse particles, the wind's ripple saying, walk with me. Not against me. Between thorn and brush there are threads of shade that are not worth chasing if they cost a stumble, but perfect for a 60 heartbeat rest. Hospitality flows even at the day's peak. A stranger drawn under the skirt is given the shadow seat nearest the draft, not nearest the honour post. Tea is poured higher at noon to feather air into it. A pinch of herb calms the tongue and lengthens patience. Conversation becomes staccato, short news, soft jokes, old proverbs about shade. That shade is a lender, not a gift. That shade kept at knee height will calm a whole caravan. That shade wasted on empty ground can make a neighbour grudging, and then, as the sun's syllables lengthen toward afternoon, the house of hair and rope changes key. Skirts rise a little, not to invite heat but to invite movement. The reed screen rolls and ties. Mats shake. Jars are topped. The ridge is checked by hand and told good work. The tent, faithful as a camel, modest as a well, has kept a family, a herd. And a handful of travellers compose through the fiercest hour by doing the simplest thing well, turning light into a place where breath could stay untroubled. Some noons cannot be waded out. A message must cross a salt flat. A well is a ridge away. A sick goat needs a leafier hollow. Moving under the high sun is not bravado. It's craft. The caravan becomes a travelling shade machine, each body, beast, cloth, and paws arranged so heat spends itself while people keep their calm. The pace is the first tool. Noon steps are shorter, closer, rounder at the heel. Ankles lift like they're reading, not arguing. A staff touches sand before the foot, testing crust, finding coarse grain under glare. The line is no line at all but a cluster in thirds, a front pair setting angle to wind. A middle pocket where elders and children walk in the softest air. A rear pair that reads footprints for fatigue and drifting sand for mood. Distance between people is set by shadows, just enough that each person's shade kisses the next traveller's ankle. The caravan wears the sun like a loose garment, shade is stitched from small pieces. A reed screen rides half-raised between two short poles, its shadow puddling along calves. A cloak runs from a saddle ring to the staff of the walker beside, making a low awning that moves with them. Camels kneel for rests on a diagonal so their flanks cast overlapping islands. When they rise, those islands become lanes for a dozen measured steps before the next halt. A water skin in a damp outer sack is slung where the breeze is honest, not where honour is, cooling by draught, not by rank. Microshade is never higher than hips. Heat climbs, so the human current flows under it. Route is chosen by feel as much as by eye. Darker swales of coarse grains hold their manners. Glare-white sift runs like gossip underfoot. Walking close along the windward shoulder of a low dune gives firmer purchase and a truer horizon. The leeward slip face promises ease but slides into complaint. Brush throws better shade than boulder at noon. Thorn bleeds wind, rock sulks and radiates. A fingerdip of salt crust breaks with a papery sigh. Don't trust it. Skirt the edge until footprints stop glossing. Mirage is greeted like a rumor, noticed, not obeyed. Truth lives at 2 paces ahead, in how sand takes a stick, not in how distant stage managers lakes that flee clothing becomes kinetics. Headcloth tails are loosened to make a thin draft down the nape. A second fold pads the crown. Sleeves bell at the wrist so each swing pumps a thumb of air across the forearm. The outer robe speaks calmly to the sun. The darker inner layer drinks stray light and keeps the skin from thinking it is being interrogated. Sandals breathe, straps fingerwidth shy of tight, a quiet loop of cloth under the ankle leather so friction doesn't negotiate away patience. Before each start, people dust the soles with a pinch of sand to take off the sweat shine. Unshiny feet argue less with ground. Water is a rhythm, not an indulgence. A sip, a breath through the nose, a swallow. Clay jars exhale if you let them. Skins cool themselves if you hang them in the small wind made by steady walking. Salt rides the pocket in a twist of cloth. A few grains on the tongue repair the conversation between muscles and mind. Tea, light, not proud, settles the stomach and makes sweat honest. Dates are arithmetic, one for the next ridge, one for the well, one in reserve for the surprise. Animals set the etiquette. Camels do not resent noon. They negotiate with it. Reins are suggestions, not commands. A lead beast reads heat shimmer like script and chooses the crown of firm sand over a tempting white strip. Hobbles are looser at midday. A creature that thinks it can step wide will hold its temper. Packs hang balanced and low so they don't soar at a sore point. A watcher walks where their eye can read a strap before it offends. Goats fall in and out of shade like fish in and out of eddies. Their noses find the thread of breeze that people pretend is not there until goats prove it is. Breaks are small, frequent, and useful. 60 heartbeats under a reed tongue to rewrap headcloths. Another 60 to swap the damp face of a jar's cloth to the wind. A quick brush out of sandals. A strap trimmed and reholed with a thorn and a patient hand. A child is given a task, counts 7 ripples on the dune, then we walk, to turn heat scolding into a game with rules. Stories shrink to proverbs at noon. Shade kept low cools blood. Eat the date, not the argument. Mirage is for the eyes. Route is for the feet. Navigation uses noon's blunt instruments, wind, grain, and the sky's white. Wind writes the dune's hieroglyphs. Walk with the long strokes, not across them. Grain tells you which side of a brush was most recently scoured. The cleaner side is upwind. If the world blurs into brightness, travelers aim not at a distant landmark but at a time. To the thorn with 3 arms, to the swale before the pale dune, to the place where the breeze thickens. Noon is measured in shade lengths and breath counts, not miles. Etiquette keeps tempers cool. Bright cloth is turned inward when passing another party so glare doesn't become a challenge. The first shade goes to the newest arrival. The first sip to the person who didn't ask. News is traded like water, short pause. Well 2 ridges, north. Slip faces soft. Goats found a thread. A traveller who pushes the pace is given a job, carry the reed, because work teaches cadence quicker than advice. A traveller who lags is given shade without remark. Nothing ferments anger faster than being made a lesson in front of the sun. Feet are the ledger of success. At each halt, sandals are shaken, not slapped. Toes are brushed, not rubbed raw. A pinch of dust under the strap makes a kinder bearing than sweat. A smear of fat at night repairs what noon argued. Blisters are treaties, caught early, padded with a twist of cloth, forgotten by afternoon. The worst mistake is pride, insisting on long strides over soft sand to prove a point the desert doesn't care about. Short, many, patient wins every time. When the well-mouth finally appears, stones hot to the eyes but cool to the palm, you feel what the method bought, hearts that never sprinted into trouble, minds that never bargained against their own bodies, animals that still think humans deserve to be followed. The reed rolls, the mat is flicked, the jar murmurs as it drinks a rope of water. Noon's lesson ends the way it began. Nothing dramatic, only a thread of moving shade, stitched across bright ground by people who refuse to fight what could be befriended. In the fiercest hour, water is not conquered. It is courted. The desert teaches a careful grammar for thirst, small sips, long shadows, clay that breathes, skins that sigh, ropes that do not burn the hand. Bedouin nooncraft is not about cold water. Ice is theatre here, but about coolth, the quiet subtraction of heat until a sip welcomes the mouth without startling it. Shade, air, clay, fibre, each becomes a partner that teaches water to be kind. A good well begins above its lip. Stones at the mouth are dressed not only for footing but for touch. Smooth where hands will rest, pale enough to refuse glare, dark where the rope runs so eyes can follow the line without squinting. A low windbreak of thorn or plaited palm keeps sand from gossiping into the shaft. The bucket's rope is fat where it passes the coping and lean where it knots, fat to spare the stone, lean to keep knots honest. At noon, work is conducted in the language of shadow. A reed mat set knee-high to the sun paints cool across wrists. The pull and hand over hand are timed to breath and to the creak that tells you the bucket has turned below. Drawing water is a duet. The first fill cools the rope and the stone, not the throat. The second yields the sip that admits you did not rush. A cloth is dipped and laid over the jar's shoulder, dark side out, so the jar can exhale honestly. Evaporation is the well's second wind. You do not deny it by demanding chill. Clay with a little grit left in the body, unburnished and glazed, breathes better than proud, tight pottery. The jar's hips are rounded and its neck modest. It wants to sit on woven rings that lifted a finger from hot ground and let the breeze court it from below. Skins are the travelling wells. A water skin lives in shade, under a low reed tongue, in the lee of a camel's flank, wrapped in a damp cloth that makes a microclimate without scalding the sun. The best skins are tanned without vanity. They smell honest and do not perfume the water. A thong loop near the neck lets the skin ride where air is truest, not where rank prefers. At noon, privilege is measured in draught, not in display. When the wind freshens, the skin is turned so its damp face faces the breeze. When wind loosens to a drowse, the skin is swaddled so its coolth does not wander off into glare. Cups are small and frequent, the arithmetic of mercy. The hand that pours paints a thin stripe of shade across the rim so lips find the vessel without hunting. The first swallow is a rinse and a thank you, the second a promise to keep going, the third saved for after the sandals are shaken and the scarf is rewrapped. Salt is not an apology. It is a pact. A few grains on the tongue turn heavy legs into good listeners. Tea is brewed light at noon, amber that glows like patience. Poured high, it invites air, not spectacle. Sweetness is a measure, not a performance. Dates and tea are cousins when the sun is stern. The well yard is a workshop of shade. A black haircloth wing stretches from a post to cast a lake where jars can breathe. A palm front fence with loose weave bleeds wind, protecting coolth without imprisoning it. The ground is brushed so glare dulls to mat and bare feet find texture. Children learn to lay a short brush of thorn along the mat's windward edge so it doesn't kick. They learn to set jars in a shallow ring of sand, cool to the hand because sun has not been allowed to hoard there. The shade is kept low. Cool blood returns from ankles and makes tempers easy. Etiquette is as important as engineering. The newest arrival is offered the darkest corner under the wing. The earliest arrival fills and moves their jars to the leeward rank so shade can rotate among strangers like a fair judge. A traveller who insists on cold is given explanation before water. Cool is the goal, not shock. People repeat the proverb with a smile. Cold is for the tongue. Cool is for the body. Laughter at noon is light and short. The well likes it, but not in long stories. Maintenance hums quietly. Ropes are dressed with a palm rub to smooth burrs. The fat section is rewrapped before it polishes the stone to blindness. The bucket's lip is bound with leather so it will kiss the coping, not gnaw it. Clay rings are checked for ants and the small neighbour nations of the yard. Mercy to them keeps the yard honest for people. The well's cover, board, mats, or stones, rests back on the lip between drawers. At noon, light is a thief that tries to climb down shafts and heat the cool at the bottom. A cover is a door politely kept mostly closed on the march. Water discipline saves steps you don't have to take later. Skins ride where they can bathe in air. A spare skin rides empty but damp, ready to cool fast when it earns its fill. A jar is never left on bare ground at a halt. It stands on a sleeping rope coil or a palm ring, lifted from baking stone the way a polite guest is given a chair. The person who carries the reed tongue also keeps the water's shade. When the group stops for 60 heartbeats, the tongue goes up knee-high first thing, and a strip of damp cloth is turned to meet the little wind. No matter how shy it is, food cooperates with coolth. Noon bread is thin and quick, more shade than substance. Dates are shade and sugar both. A smear of salty cheese reigns in the habit of gulping. A few almonds, a few dried figs, chewed, not celebrated. Keep mouth and mind employed while the jar exhales. The child who wants to gulp is given a task. Pour a line of water along the jar's shoulder and tell when the wind lifts the damp into cool. Instruction replaces argument. The child learns that patience tastes better in 2 minutes than pride does now. Animals drink by ritual as well. A camel's first mouthful is often not drunk. It is swished and spilled, a low, patient wash across its own tongue to call sense back to nerves. Goats drink from a shallow pan set in the shade lake at the skirt's edge. They are greedy in brightness, sensible in shadow. The dog is handed water in a cupped palm first. The bowl comes after. Beasts, like people, ask to be invited to coolness before being given quantity. Wells collect stories like jars collect cool. At the coping, news arrives in sips. A slip face soft 2 ridges east, a thorn patch rich with breeze at the head of a wadi, a caravan that passed and moved like weather, not like an army. People trade lore about clay, whose jars breathe the best, which potter left a little grit so the skin can exhale, and about skins, whose tanning smells like clean shade, whose seams do not brag then fail. The well is a ledger of such memory. Each visit writes a new line that will be read by someone else under another sun. The geometry of the yard changes with the sun's page. At late morning, shadows are short and precise. The shade lake must be drawn deliberately, knee-high and loyal. At true noon, shade shrinks its promises. Jars huddle, mats creep. At early afternoon, shadows begin their long kindness. The wing can rise a finger, the rope lines can lose a little of their humility. Tea can widen its sweetness and still behave. By the time the first real breeze writes a sentence across the yard, everyone feels it in eyebrows and shoulders. That is the cue to shift from coolth to movement. Departure is a tidy ritual. Jar mouths are wiped with the clean side of a cloth that has seen more shadow than smoke. Stoppers are tied, not rammed. Skins are swung where they will keep their draft. The wing rolls, the mat flicks, the thorn is gathered respectfully back into fence or fire. A last stripe of water is brushed on the coping stone, not waste. But thanks, the stone will cool a thumb's breadth and the next hand will think well of the place before it even drinks, and then the yard fades behind you. A square of manners shrinking to a stitch on the horizon. The jar murmurs at your hip. The skin tugs lightly like a calm child. Ankles feel the shade that stayed low when it mattered. The desert's noon has not been defeated. No one defeats noon, but it has been negotiated with, line by line. Shade at the right height, clay that breathes, rope that remembers, sips that make sense. Cool is not a temperature here. It is a way of behaving. Midday survival is mostly the art of keeping the body from making enemies with the sun. Bedouin nooncraft treats flesh like delicate gear, cooled by shade at the right height, paced by sips that persuade rather than surprise, protected by cloth that behaves, and steadied by little remedies that owe more to patience than to drama. Breath is the first medicine. At high sun, mouths close, noses rule. Inhale through cloth, headcloth tails or a light scarf folded once, so air arrives friendly. Steps follow breath, not the other way round. 3 calm breaths to shift the mat. 3 to hoist the jar. 3 to cross the bright patch between shade pools. Hearts taught this tempo do not petition for more water than sense allows. Skin wants shade, not chill. A damp cloth laid where pulse speaks, wrists, crook of elbow, nape, returns calm faster than a gulp of cold. The jar's exhalation is shared politely. Wet cloth to jar shoulder, then jar breeze to wrists. A smear of oil, olive or seed, under sandal straps keeps friction from turning noon into grievance. A dusting of clean sand on soles before walking takes the shine off sweat and makes feet negotiate, not slide. Food is measured like footsteps. Noon meals are quiet. Thin bread that finishes before heat grows impatient. Dates in 1s and 2s. A small, salty bite that convinces muscles to keep their promises. Tea is brewed pale, poured high to invite a breeze into the cup, sipped as if you meant to make the hour last. Sweetness is a tool, enough to mend mood, not enough to wake thirst into argument. Clothing is therapy by folds. A darker inner layer under a pale robe drinks stray glare without scalding the eyes. Sleeves that bell at the wrist pump a thumb of air with every step. Headcloths are tuned by touch. One extra fold at the crown against hammer heat. Tails widen to shade ear and jaw when wind throws hot dust. Belts and girths slacken a hole at noon. Bodies swell, leather swells, and only pride refuses. Animals keep people honest. Camels kneel with legs tucked, turning their own shade into a low lake. People drink with their calves inside that lake, then offer the beast its turn, pan set in shadow, not in spectacle. Goats choose the reed wing's edge where breeze is truest. The header notes the angle and shifts the peg a handspan to match. A dog is watered from a hand before a bowl, so it drinks calm, not fast. Calm dogs cool children. First aid is mostly first kindness. Heat-stiff talk loosens with a pinch of salt on the tongue and a minute in knee-high shade. A hot head learns humility from a damp cloth turned to face wind and a cup of pale tea in 3 swallows. Blisters are treaties. Stopped early, padded with a twist of cloth, forgotten by dusk. Prickly heat is talked down by dust. Clean sand brushed lightly over damp skin where cloth rubs. If eyes smart with glare, the headcloth's edge comes lower and the person is given a task in shade. Mend a toggle. Replat a cord. Work that shrinks the world until nerves remember themselves. Siesta is logistics, not laziness. The camp becomes a diagram of coolth. Reed wing knee-high for arms and ankles. Jars on rings under damp cloths. Mats set so everyone can lie long with heads toward the draft. Chores that make heat worse are outlawed until the sun's tone softens. No fire teased into smoke, no leather stretched to sulk, no boastful errands across bright sand. Instead, sewing, knot dressing, brush making, quiet lessons for children, shake sandals, tip stones toward you, pour water along the jar. Drowsing is part of maintenance. A rested person does not waste water on hurry later. Etiquette keeps the shade sweet. Newcomers get the darkest corner first. The loudest robe turns inward when passing another camp. Glare is a kind of rudeness. Water is offered before news. Boasts about distance or thirst are answered with proverbs, not applause. Eat the date, not the argument. Shade low cools the blood. Noon has no patience for contests. It rewards choreography. When afternoon finally lifts its chin and wind writes a sentence across the camp, bodies feel it before flags do. Eyebrows cooler, breath suddenly generous. Wet cloths are turned, straps retied, sandals shaken. The shade that kept close descends into memory, and people rise without hurry, carrying a little of the cool inside. Wrists quiet, tongues honest, animals unconcerned. Noon was not defeated. It was hosted well. Even without cloth or rope, the desert carries its own library of shadows. At noon, those chapters get thin, but they don't disappear. Bedouin craft learns the page-turning, where ground keeps a pocket of cool, where wind writes a small mercy, how stone and sand hold their tempers differently. Shade here is not built. It's discovered, coaxed, and portioned out like dates. Wadis are noon's longest sentences. A dry riverbed seems bare under the hammering sun, yet its banks remember a different hour. The south-facing slope glares and bakes. The north-facing slope hoards a sliver of tenderness. A traveller walks the line where sand gives way to gravel, and the bank lifts just enough to throw a blade of shadow. Even a hand's-width stripe at ankle height matters. Blood returning from the feet comes home calmer. Where reeds or tamarisk stitch the edge, air slows and eddies. You sit with calves in that thin cool and let the heart settle while the jar exhales. Dunes speak a grammar of wind and light. Their windward shoulders wear firm grain and honest texture. The leeward slip faces, pretty in photographs, are treacherous in feet and furious in heat. Shade collects at the foot of the slip in a narrow fan no taller than a knee. That is enough. You traverse the windward shoulder, step down into the fan, pause for 60 heartbeats, then climb out along the firm line again. A camel's shadow, thrown diagonally across the fan, becomes an annex. You drink with your calves inside it, then pass the place to the next pair of ankles without fuss. Rock keeps a different time. Dark boulders look like lodgings but radiate like stoves at noon. Pale rock, limestone, chalk, wears a kinder face, especially where wind has cut a shallow overhang. True relief hides in the small ledges that toes can share. A seat 2 hands above sand with a lip at the front, shaded by the smallest brow of stone, will cool a person faster than a grand cave that traps hot breath. Shade that breathes is worth more than shade that broods. Trees are living windcatchers. Garth and acacia don't throw a single theatrical shadow. They sift and comb the air. A goat hair cloak slung low between 2 lower branches becomes a breathing wall, not an oven door. You face the breeze and sit where the filtered light freckles the ground. Spots mean moving air, and moving air makes the damp cloth on your wrist do its quiet miracle. Goats angle their noses to this slow current. A child can learn to read it by watching whiskers, not leaves. Salt flats and hard pans are the desert's mirrors and should be treated with wit. They promise speed and then punish it. You search their edges for drifted sage or brush, the windbreaks that cast rare, clean shadows. Better a staccato of 10 small, honest rests at knee height than one grand stand in a glare. The stick goes first. If it scrapes and sings, the crust is friend. If it sighs and breaks, you skirt and stay humble. Hameda, the stony plateau, looks merciless but keeps pockets. The eye learns to hunt for turtle stones, flat rocks backed by a mound of smaller chips. A hand can tip the flat just enough to make a linter for a jar or a wrist. The stone returns the favor by shading what you love while your own body shades the act. When you leave, you set the turtle back in its original posture. The desert forgets the borrowing and stays generous. Little oases, more idea than mapdot, are not only palms and water. They are also habits. A ring of trunk bases holds cool that the fronds do not advertise. The best seat is not against the tree, ants negotiate there, but just outside the ring, where the trunk's own shade meets the frond's sifted light. You set the jar on a woven ring, brush the ground to dull glare, lift your headcloth 1 fold, and feel the body drop a quiet gear. Noon does not stop, but your metabolism does not chase it. Cliff feet and canyon bends are noon's conspirators. A bend that faces a little east will still remember the morning by midday, holding a pale crescent of shade that doesn't simmer. A bend that stares full west stores heat like a grudge. Bedouin law names these bends the way sailors name currents. The bend that keeps olives, the bend that tastes of iron, the bend where the fly sleeps, toponyms that translate, at noon, into choices the body can trust. When wind rises, the land edits itself. Shamal and Kamsin arrive like moods, dry, abrasive, telling stories the skin would rather not hear. People turn shade into windbreak, reed tongue low, back to the drift, jar under a damp cloth with its cool side facing the breeze. Eyes look 2 paces down, not out. Breath moves under cloth, not bare. Dust makes its own small shade in the beam. You don't stare at it. You let it make the air legible. Reading ground color is a quiet science. Grayer patches in an ochre field often mean bound grains, firmer underfoot and kinder under sun. Patches that glint white at noon are often deceit, scalding crust or shells over silt. The rule becomes the old one. Walk the mat, rest on the pale. Mat tells the eye where traction and kindness overlap. Pale tells the jar where its exhale will count for more. Root timing borrows shade from the day's geometry. In a broken country of banks and rocks, you choose a line that keeps your shoulders touched by shadow every few minutes, even if it eats distance. In open country, you commit to short, useful halts, shade at the knee, breath in 3s, sip in 1s, and refuse the glamour of a far, lone tree that will cost more heat than it returns. Noon loves to bluff. The safest players bet small and often. Etiquette applies to borrowed shade the same as built shade. A patch is never kept longer than the time it takes to do one sensible thing. Rewrap a headcloth, cool a jar, trim a strap, teach a child not. The next person inherits the place immediately, and the line moves on a few handspans. No one argues about order. Ankles speak for lungs, and lungs set the law.by mid-afternoon the land remembers its manners. Waddy banks grow generous, dunes elongate their fans, rock overhangs soften, trees lengthen their sift. You feel it first in the eyebrows, then in the calves. The world that was all glare becomes a page with margins. You rise, Roll the reed, brush the ground smooth, tip the turtle stone back, and step out along the windward shoulder with the knowledge that you didn't fight the desert. You read it. Shade was there all along. Thin, yes, but honest, and you matched your size to its size until the sun agreed to be less stern. Noon is the hour when manners do the heavy lifting. In the desert, survival is cooperation disguised as custom. Shade rotated like a borrowed stool, water poured as if every sip were a vote for calm, news traded in brief pours the way tea is. When the light is stern, etiquette is engineering, shade is shared by choreography, not by argument. A reed wing, set knee-high, belongs first to ankles and working hands, not to rank. The darkest slice goes to the newest arrival, then rotates with the breeze like a fair judge. A camel is a moving awning with opinions. Its shade is portioned by need. Child, elder, the person who mends the strap everyone will rely on in an hour. Cloaks slung low from saddle to staff make alleys of cool. As the caravan drifts a few handspans, each walker inherits an alley without anyone announcing it. If two parties meet, bright cloth is turned inwards so glare doesn't become a challenge. And the wing with the better draft is offered first with the phrase that empties pride from heat. Sit for 60. Water is offered before news. Cups are small and frequent. A thin stripe of shade is painted across the rim so lips find it without hunting. The first swallow is etiquette. Swish and spill a whisper on the tongue to wake it. Then 2 sips, then thanks. Salt follows as punctuation, not as spectacle. The person who pours never empties a skin to please an audience. They keep the jar breathing under a damp cloth so the next stranger will not drink heat. At noon, coolth is a commons. Jars sit on woven rings. Skins ride where wind is honest. And the caravan acts like a single organism nursing its water at the safest temperature it can afford. Pace is kept by breath, not by will. Steps in threes is the rule. 3 slow breaths to the next patch, 3 to the reed shift, 3 to the dunes fan. A traveller who presses ahead is given a job whose rhythm scolds without shaming. Carry the reed, count 7 ripples, keep the damp side of the cloth turned to the breeze. A traveller who lags inherits the ankle place in the centre pocket. No commentary, only shade. The line is a cluster in thirds, front readers of grain and wind, a middle pocket where elders and children walk in the softest air, a rear that reads footprints and moods. Everyone announces halts the same way, hand on head, re-wrap. Palm to wrist, cool, 2 fingers to lips, sip. All gestures small enough not to spend anyone else's patience, signals a cloth and posture rather than sound. A headcloth tail flicked once to the left means veer to firmer grain, twice means fan shade here. A staff held low and still is a wait for wind sign. A staff held upright with a slack wrist says easy downslope. Hands never point at people. They point at light and ground, because noon respects information, not orders. When dust runs with a caravan like a curious dog, voices fold inside cloth. Talk returns to proverbs sized for heat. Walk the mat, rest on the pail. Shade low cools blood. Meeting strangers at high sun is a ceremony of economies. The greeting is place-shaped, not boast-shaped, from the bank to the well, from the ridge to the thorn with 3 arms. Skin is offered to shade before any tail. Hospitality at noon is the right to lie down with your calves in cool for 60 heartbeats. Trade is light and useful. Needles, toggles, a soft brush for haircloth. A twist of tea, and the payment that travels farthest is information. Slip faces soft. Crust singing, a bank that remembers morning well past noon. You leave one another lighter of ignorance even if no weight change hands. Animals have etiquette of their own, and people defer to it. Camels read shimmer and choose the crown of firm sand. Rain's a conversation, not law. When 2 caravans pass, beasts are angled so flanks share shade rather than faces sharing breath. Dogs are called to knee with a hand turned palm down, a shadow-shaped command that makes them move without barking. Goats announce breeze truth at the skirt's edge. The header nudges the peg to match, and the whole camp breathes easier without anyone being told they were wrong about wind. Tools are lent with the phrase, "It will come home," and they do, after the heat. The borrower returns a peg, a ring, a slider, with a palm's worth of coolth on it, a damp cloth's memory, and with the word served. Rope is coiled and lifted from hot ground onto a sleeping jar so it will not learn bad habits. A brush of thorn is left along the reed's windward edge for the next user. Etiquette turns objects into citizens with good reputations. Disagreements at noon are settled by the ground, not by tongues. Mirage says lake, Crust says no, the staff goes first. If it sighs and breaks, the map changes without debate. The caravan skirts, the proverb appears, eyes brag, feet balance, and the story of pride is saved for night when laughter can spend it without interest. If two readers disagree on grain, they trade positions for 1 dune length. The result is measured in blisters avoided, not in victory declared. Heat loves argument. The caravan refuses to feed it. Children are given jobs that teach survival while pretending to be games. 1 counts ripples on a dune, 7, then rest. 1 turns the jar's cloth when the damp face goes dull. 1 shakes sandals and brushes clean sand onto toes to take the shine off sweat. They fetch the palm ring for the jar, choose the turtle stone that will shade a wrist for a minute, and carry the proverb that fits the day like a tool, eat the date, not the argument. These chores make them partners in coolth. Partners complain less and learn faster than pupils. Dress has manners. Bright skirts turn inward when passing. The darker inner layer faces the sun. The pale outward makes peace with eyes. Belts are loosened a hole. Pride tightens nothing at noon. A loop of cloth under the ankle strap prevents rub. A pinch of dust under the sole prevents slide. People who know the hour check one another's folds the way sailors check one another's knots, without fuss, without offense, because failure is expensive and courtesy is cheap. Rest sites are occupied lightly and abandoned kindly. Ground is brushed to dull glare at arrival and brushed again at departure so the next ankles inherit a friendly surface. Turtle stones are tipped to shade a jar, then set back as found. A thin wet line is painted along the coping stone of a well as thanks. It will cool a thumb's breadth for the next hand. No one owns a patch. The sun does. Etiquette is how mortals borrow it without paying in quarrels. News moves with the shade. When a breeze thickens, the word travels by eyebrow, then by hand to head, re-wrap, then by the reed going up knee-high before any story is told. If the wind turns mean, charmal sharpening its teeth, the caravan becomes smaller, cloth low, voices inside, eyes 2 paces down, animals angled to share lee. The signal to hunker is a cloak's edge tapped twice. The signal to rise is the same edge tapped once and lifted a finger. No heroics, just a consensus that looks like instinct. Be why the time afternoon lengthens shadows into proper sentences. The caravan has spent its best manners and found them worth more than strength. Everyone stands a fraction cooler than their son, because courtesy kept blood returning from ankles and shade, kept water breathing, kept pride out of decisions. The line gathers itself, reed rolls, jar murmurs, sandals shake, and what might have been a duel with noon is revealed as a dance conducted in small, decent steps. Before shade becomes a roof, it is thread between fingers. Noon safety begins in the slow music of spinning rooms and palm yards, women teasing luster from goat hair, men splitting palm ribs to the thinness of patience, children plaiting reed until it behaves like cloth. The desert's house is woven long before its pegs meet sand. Every noon that passes peacefully has a morning years earlier where someone taught fibre to breathe. Goat hair is shade's first alphabet. Combed from animals that know the sun by its first name, the fibres are dark on purpose, black that drinks brightness without throwing it back into eyes. Carded with small, stubborn combs and spun against the thigh or with a drop spindle. The hair twists into yarn that remembers 2 things at once, to swell a little when kissed by rare damp, and to slack a little when heat asks for air. At the loom, 2 ground beams, a rhythm of heddle and hand. Women send shuttle through warp until strips are born, striped more by custom than vanity. Each strip is a sentence. Together they make the grammar of a tent that turns light into whether you can live in. Palm gives the grammar punctuation. Ribs are split and smoothed. Fronds are dried to the tone that hums when stroked by wind. Coarse rope is rolled from peel and fibre into lines that hold without sulking. From palm come the sliders, simple blocks with bored holes, and the rings that keep jars from learning the bad habits of hot ground. Palm makes the breathing fence, a screen with loose weave that bleeds wind instead of blocking it. It throws a shade that is more verb than noun, a motion you can sit inside and not grow heavy with. Reed is the desert's graph paper. Cut when sap is low, laid in tidy ranks, then stitched with palm cord into mats, that can be rolled, tied, unrolled, again and again without losing their manners. This is the knee-high lake of shade that caravans carry. 2 short poles, 1 mat, a handful of toggles, and suddenly ankles find cool blood on the far side of a bright hour. A good mat has memory. Its slats take a set that matches the way your hand likes to knot its ties and the draft likes to slide across its face. Cloth learns physics by ritual. Before a panel joins the house, it is wet and stretched, dried, brushed, 3 small obediences that teach it to exhale. A haircloth strip hung in the morning's mildness learns how much to open when heat rises and how much to close when the wind grows opinionated. Edges are bound with palm thread herringbone so the cloth doesn't fray into noise when the shamal rehearses. Knots are taught to sit low and long. Toggles are asked to be polite, to hold when tugged and yield when asked. No drama at noon. Rope is shade's memory, and it is braided to forgive. Goat hair becomes lines that shrug at grit and keep their temper when pulled wet, then dry, then wet again. Palm fiber becomes lighter cords for mat ties and jar cradles. Their fray is honest and visible before it becomes failure. Children learn to braid by counting, over 2, under 1. Breathe, and the count becomes a proverb they will someday use while adjusting a skirt in noon wind. Over 2. Under 1, shade will stay until the tea is poured. Stitching is done with a needle that knows both hair and palm. Horn needles slide with gentler intent through haircloth. Bone or palm thorn needles teach palm cord to weave without splitting. Seams are spaced with a thumb's rule, close enough to keep sand from gossiping in, open enough that air doesn't feel scalded. Along the bottom hem, little loops wait like ears. They listen for pegs and sliders, ready to take slack or strain as noon's mood demands. Dye is less about color than about temperature and patience. The tent need not be bright. It is better if it isn't, but belts, bands, and ties take the whisper of walnut or pomegranate, a temperate brown that behaves under sun. Darker inside linings drink stray glare. Paler outer wraps for jugs admit their job is to keep coolth moving, not to hoard it. Cloth that has met tea and smoke has learned humility. It does not shout. It suggests repair is a ceremony that happens at the kindest hours. Late morning under the lifted skirt, or the hollow just after tea, when hands want work but minds don't want argument. A broken slider is carved anew from palm with the little knife that lives in a braid. A frayed edge is kissed with a herringbone of palm thread. A stubborn knot is baptized in a drop of water and talked into reason with a thorn pick. Children bring problems the way they bring pebbles. Proud until praise teaches them praise is for the solution, not the flaw. Noon shade remains honest because mornings and evenings made these small corrections without fanfare. Physics explains what custom already knew. Black cloth that seems like a bad idea to the uninitiated becomes mercy in practice. It absorbs, then breathes, pulling air up through tiny chimneys between threads. A low wing cools ankles and forearms first. The bodies return pipes. So blood arrives at the heart with a story the heart trusts. A jar in a damp sleeve loses heat by evaporation, not by drama. Its water tastes of agreement rather than victory. A reed mat set knee-high creates a sheet of slower air you can live inside for a measured minute. Raise it too high and you're only shading glare, not cooling blood. The loom room is a school where future noons rest. The rhythm, beat, breath, pass, becomes the rhythm of walking when the sun is blunt. Songs sung to keep warp true become proverbs that keep pride quiet in bright hours. Tight at the edge, loose in the middle helps a panel lie flat, and helps a caravan keep its cluster from fraying. Brush before bind keeps dust from living in seams, and keeps tempers from living in decisions. Craft is etiquette's mother. Every courteous habit at high sun has a thread that leads back to someone sitting with fiber and time, trade knits caravans into a longer shade. A family known for sliders that never sulk swaps a bag for a coil of good goat hair. A reed cutter from the marsh brings narrow slats that sing in wind. In return, his jars go home in damp sleeves that sigh. A potter whose clay breathes just enough marks his shoulders with a thumbprint. When you see it at afar, well, you set your jar near it as if beside a cousin. Shade is a commons made from many private excellences. Storage has its own manners. Haircloth sleeps rolled, not folded, so it forgets fewer grudges and raises fewer sulks when stretched. Mats are tied with their own cords. Borrowing ties from rope trains bad habits. Ropes are coiled on jars at night so they wake with cool memories. Pegs rest in sand, not sun, so they don't grow brittle. The bundle a camel carries has its layers. Mat outside for quick shade, then reed, then palm fence. Then haircloth, always the thing needed first riding where a tired hand can find it without thinking. When noon arrives, the woven world proves itself. The tent skirts lift and lower like the gills of a fish breathing in place. The wing throws its lake across knees. The mat raises its small horizon against glare. The jar exhales. The rope hums instead of complains. The ties loosen a finger without being told. Nothing is theatrical. Everything is correct. People who have made shade know what they are living in. A conversation with heat that began with comb and spindle and will end. Years later, with a cloth that has learned enough humility to be cut into smaller uses. Jar sleeves. Child's cloak, a stack of courteous patches for tomorrow, when wind writes mercy across the camp in early afternoon. You can hear the gratitude in objects. Haircloth lifts with a sound like a soft book page. Reed mats click their little thanks. Palm cords take the new angle with grace. The segment of the day that could have been a quarrel becomes a paragraph of calm because hands, long before today, taught fibers how to be patient. Shade is not an accident here. It is a craft that starts at a loom and ends at a sigh. When the caravan's dust settles at a town's edge, noon becomes a different craft. Shade is no longer only hair and reed. It is lime and lattice, wind steered by brick, water persuaded by clay. Across oasis hamlets and caravan cities, people built midday into their walls. The result is not spectacle but etiquette in stone, alleys that bend the light into reasonable sentences, courtyards that teach air to fall in love with leaves, roofs that promise rest without bragging. Alleys are the first mercy. Narrow and angled, they deny the sun a straight shot, turning glare into slivers that crawl instead of pounce. Whitewash, lime with a memory of shells, throws heat back to the sky without insulting the eye. Door lintels step inward, making shy pockets where a person can cool ankles for 60 heartbeats while pretending to examine a knocker. A single date palm planted where 2 lanes pinch becomes a roof for calves. Its trunk reads like a column in a book you have time to finish. Under arcades, shade is organized like a marketplace of favors. Suck stalls huddle behind thick piers that sip heat slowly. Awning cloths run in low bands, not high sheets, so the cool lives where blood returns from feet. Basket sellers hang broad palm mats just above knee height to filter wind. Spice sellers dampen their thresholds in a line as thin as a proverb, enough to invite a breeze, not enough to wake dust into mud. Water sellers, saka, carry skins that glisten faintly. They park themselves where air already thinks kindly of people, by the turn from sun into alley, by the notch between 2 arcades, and their cups are little lessons in moderation. Courtyards are noon's universities. A well or jar sits in the shade of a citrus, leaves that pray for rain year-round and, in praying, cool the air around them. A salsable, a ribbed, sloped fountain face, lets water creep rather than fall, pulling a draught over its cool skin. It speaks a soft, continuous sentence. Patience makes wind. The paving is not flat. Brick rises a finger here and there, turning puddles into lanes for air to move. Latticed wood, mashrabiya, projects from rooms like thoughtful eyebrows, lending shade to the street and drinking the street's draft back to the rooms through jars set in their cool bays. Roofs keep manners. Palm beams outrun the walls a little, throwing a ribbon of noon shade to the lane below as if signing a promise. Mat canopies sit under clay tiles, not above, so heat has to negotiate 2 surfaces before it startles a sleeper. Where roofs meet badge, windcatchers, the town acquires ears. These tall throats sniff for higher, kinder air and pour it down shafts that lick across wet jars or salsable faces before sinking into rooms. A good badge is tuned like an instrument, its mouth turned just off the prevailing wind to avoid bluster, its throat shaped to trade speed for cool. You can hear their competence in the hush of a room that ought to be sulking. Walls are the town's memory of mornings. Thick, lime-plastered, they hoard the day's cool and spend it at noon, then hoard noon's heat and spend it after dusk when it can be enjoyed instead of endured. Builders salt surfaces with texture, pebble dash, raised brick seams, so lamplight and moonlight later will read the street without waking sleepers. At midday, those same textures break up glare, turning the street into matte, a citywide version of walk the mat, rest on the pale. Etiquette travels indoors, too. The darkest corner of a shade band near a doorway is for the newest arrival. The host sits near a brightness to show the space is kind. Tea remains pale at noon, poured high into small cups. The first is a rinse for the mouth. The second is a promise to talk slowly. Food shrinks its courage. Flatbread, olives that remember their brine, dates that remember the tree that shaded them. Conversation is blister avoidant, news in narrow strips. Gossip tied to a time, to the ASR call, to the cellar with the blue awning. Never to distance that would wake the idea of haste. Task timing makes architecture and bodies get along. Loud trades, smithing, kill fires, go drowsy at noon or retreat behind thick walls. Quiet trades, cordage, stitching, combing goat hair. Move into the courtyard band of shade where small breezes are cultivated with wet brooms flicked across brick. Even the call to prayer seems to know the hour's nerves. It arrives like poured tea, measured and cooling. Children learn chores that are actually heat discipline. Sweeping the alley with a damp broom to sow dust back to ground. Turning jar sleeves to face a new thread of air. Counting the slow drops down a salsable rib to know when the draft is doing its duty. Water is managed as if it were a guest. Cant vents breathe in the outskirts. Stone collars around shafts that exhale night-cool air. In town, jars sit on rings of palm so they don't learn the bad habits of hot stone. Their shoulders wear damp cloths like modest shawls. A line of cool is sometimes painted along the coping with a last splash, a silent thanks to the next hand. Fountains in squares don't aim for spectacle at midday. They keep a meniscus just trembling, so evaporation steals heat calmly without waking glare. Dress speaks architecture back to itself. In sucks, bright cloth turns inward. Mashrabiya and awnings provide theatre enough. Headcloths widen over the jaw when reflected heat climbs from paving. Sleeves bell to pump courtyard air with every lift of bread to tea. Sandals relax a hole, feet swell, pride does not. The courteous loop of cloth under an ankle strap that we met in the dunes behaves just as well on tile. The city honors the desert's rules because they were written by bodies, not by walls. Meeting strangers at noon in town is not unlike meeting caravans on open ground. Greetings are place-shaped, from the Palm Street to the Coppergate, from the northern gate to the salsable with 3 ribs. Water is offered before news, shade before opinions. A stallholder with the better draft under his awning tilts the matte edge to send a thin lake of cool toward a neighbor's feet. Later, the neighbor will dampen the alley for both at ASR. Civility keeps temperature from becoming a grievance. When wind stirs, you see the town tune itself. Awnings lower a hand. Badge mouths shift a fraction. Courtyards wake their leaves and invite them to talk to air. The suck sound changes. Thicker cloth size, jars whisper at their rims, palm ribs tick in lattice as if counting the seconds until the hour softens. By late afternoon, the city has held you the way a tent would. With the same principles scaled to brick, shade where blood returns, breeze where air learns kindness, water that cools by agreement, not by shock. And when the ASR shadows finally lengthen into generosity, the alleys become rivers again, this time of people. The lime walls let go of some heat. Awnings lift. Tea deepens. Voices lengthen their sentences. Noon passes not because anyone defeated it, but because builders and bodies conspired to make it a guest at the edges of rooms, never the host at the center. The desert taught this first. The town remembered and set it in lime and wood. a lasting choreography of coolth. At high sun, sight grows opinionated. The desert edits edges, flattens hills, turns distance into rumour. Survival becomes less about seeing far and more about seeing truly. Bedouin law answers Noon's tricks with small, testable truths. What the sky says about wind, what sand says about footing, what shimmer says about water you should not chase. Mirage is not deceitful. It is literal. Light bending around heat and telling you the air is layered. Treat it like gossip. Attend, then verify. Lakes appear where flats are hottest and flattest. Their shoreline moves when you blink. The cure is the stick and the two-pace rule. You drop your gaze to where your feet will be after 2 calm steps and test there. Reality lives in the next 2 paces, never at the horizon at noon. If a pool stays still while wind ruffles brush beside it, it's a picture, not a drink. Shimmer has dialects. A low, tight flutter above sand, like bee wings, means the top skin is loose and hot. Walk the matte flecks where wind has bitten gloss away. A broader, slower haze hovering above gravel says the stones are radiating but stable. Feet will mind the heat but not the footing. On salt crust, a mirror shine that breaks into papery sighs under a stick is a treaty you should not sign. Skirt to the rougher edge where the sheen turns to whisper. Sky tells the ground's next mood. When the dome goes white and the far line of low country melts upward, heat is pooling. Pace shrinks, shade lowers. Water becomes rhythm instead of relief. A blue that deepens and hardens even at noon says wind is on its way. You feel it in eyebrows first, then in the jars cloth that begins to think like a sail. High, thin streamers, mares' tails, that hurry while the ground loafs promise a campson tomorrow. Tie your toggle short now. Teach your mat cords their knots before the hour grows loud. Sand is a script written by wind. Long, even ripples spaced like careful handwriting mean a recent, steady breeze. Walk with the lines. Tight, nervous ripples overlaid at angles mean arguments aloft. Choose firm ground along the windward shoulder of small dunes where grains have settled their dispute. Where ripples die into smooth glaze, expect glare and heat. Where they sharpen into crisp ribs, expect better footing and less burn. Colour is a compass. Pale chalk and limestone throw mercy. Black basalt hoards noon and gives it back with interest. In mixed fields, hunt the grey, weathered fragments softened by dust. They bite the heel kindly. Greens at noon are often lies. A vivid patch may be halophile crust or hard pan weeping mirage like perfume. Trust olive and sage, the colours of plants that understand thirst. If the wind carries their scent even faintly, you're near a bend, a bank, or a seam where air slows and shade can be made. Wind writes etiquette as much as route. A headwind steals sweat and generosity. You cut your shade lower, narrow speech to proverbs, and move in a cluster that wastes less water. A quartering breeze gives one cheek courtesy and the other scolding. You turn the headcloth tail to feed the shaded side and let the bright side be dull. When the charmal arrives with grit in its teeth, eyes come down to 2 paces, voices go inside cloth, and the caravan becomes smaller and more correct. Reed wing knee high, jar cloth damp. Staff testing crust before pride has opinions. Hills and escarpments hold noon truth in very thin lines. On a slope, the blue edge, that faint cool at the base of sunward rock, belongs to ankles and jars, not to backs and talk. The sliver is enough. A minute there cools returning blood more than a grand, still shadow that has trapped its own heat. In stair-step country, you trade distance for discipline, upwind faces for rest, downwind faces for walking, always negotiating with light rather than challenging it. Footprints are thermometers and clocks. Fresh prints on hot sand blur at the edges in minutes. If you find edges still crisp at noon, the maker is near and likely in the same wind. News can be swapped with short sentences and shorter cups. Goat prints that deepen under brush mean the animals lingered. There was a thread of breeze there. Camel prints that skate a little on a slope mean fine, hot grains. Expect patience, not speed. The ear double-checks the eye. Heat hushes. Stability has a sound. A staff that rings on firm crust and then gives a dull thock at the next step is telling you the layer changed. Shorten stride. A jar sleeve that crackles softly as it dries is working. If it stays silent in wind, turn the damp face and give it a task again. Feet that begin to slap instead of kiss the ground are announcing fatigue. Your map shrinks to the reed wing, to the map patch, to the ankle shadow, and sanity returns. Etiquette makes optics useful. One person reads shimmer, another reads grain. A third watches the jars exhale. A fourth counts breath. Disagreement is tested, not argued. 2 June links on each choice, then compare by souls and tempers. The proverb does the deciding. Eyes brag. Feet balance. Mirage gets a glance. The reed wing gets the peg. The sun may own the hour, but decisions remain local. By early afternoon, the lies grow lazier. Lakes retreat to their stage. Edges return to things you can trust. The blue at the base of stone broadens into honest shade. And the desert stops trying to dazzle and goes back to being a book you already know how to read. The stick keeps telling the truth, the jar keeps sighing cool, and your eyes, having learned noon's grammar, become good citizens again, modest, verifying, untempted by theatre.